Reading The Unknown Reality by Jane-Ruburt-Seth, Seth book, Volume 2. Okay, so this is the official last session in this book, other than the appendix. So session 744. Now, before I read it, those who actually listen to these videos to the end, there is going to be some information that I want you guys to hear for this being the last video. So I will give that to you guys at the very end. So Rob wants to know, in our terms of time, what were some of Seth's other activities in other realities while he was giving Unknown Reality, this book, through Jane for well over a year. So in answer to that, that is what this session is about. Plus some excellent post-session excerpts. Alright, so Seth states, now, in a way, it is quite difficult to tell you what I have been doing with my time while I have been involved in the production of, quote-unquote, Unknown Reality, this book, and therefore, to some extent at least, inclined towards your time. In a manner of speaking, your experienced practical reality is made up of events that seem entire to you, or relatively complete, while from my dimension, it is apparent that your recognized events are simply portions of larger ones. I move naturally then in a realm of greater dimensionalized events. In your terms, I see not only greater chunks of time than you do, but I can, to some considerable extent, view the probable actualizations of events and times. Now, an artist does the same thing in different terms when he or she imagines the probable versions that a painting or a book or a sculpture, for example, might take. The artist does not usually understand, however, that those probable art productions do literally exist. He perceives only the final physically chosen work. Simply speaking, some of us are able to hold intact the nature of our own identities while following patterns of probable realities in which we also play a part. In your reality, the quote-unquote unknown reality we have just finished is the only version of that manuscript. Instead, it is, of course, the only version you recognize. When we are working on such a project here, in your reality, we are working on probable books also, and those are as real as your official one. In ways too difficult to explain now, your probabilities are connected by certain themes, intents, purposes. Some of these appear as subsidiary interests in your own lives, for example. Others may well be recognized by you as prime concerns, and still others may be so latent that you are unaware of them. So we have been working on a probable, quote-unquote, unknown reality. In fact, on many probable, quote-unquote, unknown realities. Not mere versions, but variations. In one reality, of course, the work was finished at the Foster Avenue house in Elmira, New York. In another, it was finished in Sayre, Pennsylvania. Now that is what I have been doing as far as your reality is concerned. That is, in my relationship with you. It is a multidimensional version of what Ruburt does in simple terms when he writes a book of his own. I've also helped in the construction, so to speak, of Rubert's psychic library, which you guys would know about if you had read her own books, okay? But so, of Rubert's psychic library, and I hope that he will be able to meet me there in the surroundings in which he feels confident and at home, and yet on neutral ground. He does not want my apparition, you might say, to intrude upon a physical living room particularly. Yet he wants to meet me in an out-of-the-way place. Now that is a sensible arrangement. He is the one who has to deal primarily with the practical aspects of our relationship, and in the business of translating my reality into your world. I quite approve, for in greater terms, I do not belong in your living room in that particular fashion. My reality is far more apparent than any apparitions. Ruburt does well because he explores so cleverly and keeps his strands of reality in good order. Others have indeed sensed me, Sue Watkins, for example, but the relationship there is far different, and it is important for Ruburt that he have clear-cut areas which I respect. Any such appearances, by the way, would also add to much superstitious nonsense. On the other hand, there is much for Ruburt to learn about my reality. Until he understood the inward order of events, he would not be able to meet me there. So the library can serve us both in that regard. I am not here going into Ruburt to any great degree, but I do have some information. Obviously, he is in the middle of a learning adventure, trying to do far more with his ordinary consciousness than most people, and trying to solve his problems and encounter his challenges without relying upon old structures of belief. He has done this even though he has been working in relatively untried areas where there seem to be few certainties. The nature of personal reality, our last book, is there for others to follow. Others, however, did not have a hand in producing it. They will try out the ideas, many of them, to the best of their ability, and learn and gain much, all the time hanging on safely to the banners of conventional beliefs. Ruburt has allowed himself no such comforts. He should remember that many people have far greater hassles with health, personal relationships, finances, and vocations, and without any satisfying accomplishments to offset their misfortunes. I will make recommendations now and then you see fit to follow them. Considering Rupert's challenges, he has done extremely well as he cleared away the debris that literally surrounds the lives of most people. In a way, his progress has been dependent upon the state of his learning, so that he has been trying to stretch the abilities of normal consciousness by drawing in other quote-unquote strands. Yet because he was the one so involved, he had to test each strand, and in the meantime, he still had his quote-unquote old consciousness with its habits to contend with. Okay, so that is basically where I'm going to stop. You guys can read the rest of that if you'd like, and I'm going to go right into notes. Okay, so skipping note number 1, going to note number 2, to see the material on Seth's concept of simultaneous time as given in the concluding notes for session 724. So you'll find that in session 724, information on simultaneous time, if you haven't been following this book the whole time in the playlist. He adds that included are some very intriguing excerpts from the 14th session, which is so true. So if you've not heard that session, you'll definitely want to hear it, plus the notes with the Seth excerpts from the 14th session. But right here, Rob inserts more from that session, where Seth stated, quote, "While I am not affected by time on your plane, I am affected by something resembling time on my plane. It is therefore still a reality of some kind to me," end quote. And then Rob adds, he says, "To Seth's remarks in that early session, I'd now like to add what he said a decade later in our time, from the 514th session, Chapter 2 of Seth Speaks. Seth states, quote, "Consciousness is not dependent upon form, as I have said, and yet it always seeks to create form. We do not exist in any time framework as you know it. Minutes, hours, or years have lost both their meaning and their fascination. We are quite aware of the time situations within other systems, however, and we must take them into account in our communications. Otherwise, what we say would not be understood," end quote. So that's pretty great for Seth's perception of time. So Rob states, following Seth's material in these paragraphs, then, there are, of course, a number of other Janes and Robs, busily living out their lives in a cluster of associated probable realities. And all of those Janes and Robs are just as real to Seth as we are. I've had the thought before. It's a somewhat chastening one, I said to Jane, joking, since it means that from Seth's viewpoint, we could be just two more individuals. All sorts of interesting questions arise. Perhaps Seth likes some of those other versions of ourselves more than he does us. I didn't ask him if I was right, though. It might even be that his favorite Jane inhabits one probable reality, his favorite Rob another. How does Seth tell all of us apart? What age differences are there among us? In which reality did we produce the quote-unquote best version of quote-unquote unknown reality? The worst. Moreover, what do all of those other Janes and Robs think of their Seths, and so on? Alright, so great things to think about. Question 4, skipping 5, I'm just going to note real quick. So not number 5 in reference to seeing Seth's apparition or meeting him in her library or any other out-of-the-way place. Rob says in note 2 for Appendix 11 in Volume 1, he refers to the time she set out to quote-unquote find Seth. So, when that appendix is done, that particular one in Volume 1, I will put that link in this video. But for now, right now, on this day, it is not ready. Okay, note number 7. In session 594 for the Appendix of Seth Speaks, if you guys have this book, my goodness, there's only one guy that has this recorded. His name is Bill Werstler. I wrote it down right there. You guys can look that up and see what you think about it. Anyways, so you can see Sue's material on how she sensed Jane's and Seth's quote-unquote speeds, as well as her own. That is some very interesting information. If you have the book or want to take the time to listen to Bill Werstler's appendix for Seth Speaks, and I will likely put that link as well. And then also note number 8, see Appendix 18 for this volume when it's ready, where it will contain much material, quote, on the complex relationships involving Jane-Ruburt-Seth, and also Rob Joseph. Okay, and then you guys can read the rest of that. Skipping the rest of these. If you guys want to read them, you can pause really, really fast. Okay, so literally I'm skipping the rest of all of this except for a little bit. So pause real fast if you want to read that. And there's the rest of that page. Pause real fast. And then there's the rest of that. So those of you who didn't read it, it's basically about ESP class never resuming after they moved into their new house and the end of this book. How most of the members, which many of them were counterparts to Rob and Jane, went on their way, like many of our friends do. They come in, they pass through, and on their way they go. Sometimes that's just the way it's meant to be. Alright, so going down here, I just want to read this part where Rob states first. He says, the longer we went without class, ESP class, the more Jane and I saw how much its demise paralleled the ending of quote-unquote unknown reality. Both events were inevitable, we came to understand. Both had had their time. Our regrets about the finishing of both are real, while simultaneously we heartily agree that the nature of life in this physical or quote-unquote camouflage reality is one of unending change and renewal. Even though we may never again see many of those counterparts we'd known, we realize that all of us are indissolubly joined. Nor is the fact that a number of us are physically separated or invisible to each of the others of great importance. For as Seth told us recently in a private session. Okay, so this is going to be the last quote in the sessions of the book, other than the appendix. So, Seth states, quote, in a strange fashion, of course, the word, quote-unquote, invisibility has meaning only in your kind of world. There is no such thing as true psychological invisibility. The physical world is dependent upon the relationship of everything from electrons to molecules to mountains to oceans. And in the scheme of reality, these are all interwoven with exquisite order, spontaneity, and a logic beyond any with which you are familiar. The counterpart idea is merely a small attempt to hint at that interrelationship, an interrelationship that, of course, includes all species and all forms of life. End quotes. Alright, so for those of you who don't want to listen to this whole video and me ramble, the next video is going to be Appendix 12. It's going to be Seth's ideas on evolution and related subjects, a discussion of evolution as seen by science, religion, and philosophy. So look forward to that next video and all the other appendix material here. Okay, so I'm not very good at on-the-spot talking. I like to think about what I need to say. So I like writing better than being on the spot. I'm a very shy person by nature, but I have gotten a lot better at that from when I was a kid. But what I want to say, so I wrote this down, hopefully it's clear, is that recording puts things into perspective in ways that I was not expecting. So in context with this material, doing recording, it helps put a fresh perspective on life during the recording process, the editing, and even the final product. It's hard not to think about it in relationship to life, as in the mistakes in words that I've read, sometimes still missing after editing, the flow of the phrases either lacking the correct inflection for emphasis, or even stating a phrase with overemphasis at times, and the information possibly getting misunderstood or distorted inadvertently. Which is why I like to show the pages being read, so anyone who is like, now what the heck did you just say, can just pause and read it. Now I know from Seth that each person will pick up on certain points and not really hear others based on how they perceive things and each person's interests at the time of reading or listening. So now that this book is done, minus the appendix material at this particular date, I either suggest that you get yourselves a copy of this book and experience it by reading it in your own hands at your own pace. Nothing can replace a book in your hands, guys. Or if that isn't possible, then to listen to it all again this would be obviously most ideal after I've completed the appendix by being able to listen to the corresponding appendix after the session, and those that are in relation to that session if applicable. I started this channel literally in my garage, with the book in my lap, and I've come quite a long way since then. I listened to some of those the other day, my oldest videos, and I just cringe, like, oh gosh. But it does put things into perspective, so that's good. And at some point I would like to redo some of those older videos, because the information is so important, I think. And okay, so I also want to tell you guys that from experience, okay, that reading or listening to an audiobook once is just not enough, even for those that can easily retain information heard or read once. Also, taking notes on especially important points is so helpful. Time consuming, yes, but so worth it. Also, jotting down your own thoughts about the information in a journal or directly on the page if you have the book in hand will also be invaluable to you at a later date, and also helps to seal that important point in your conscious mind. So this information may be all obvious to some of you, or maybe some of you think it's not necessary. Always up to you what you want or choose to do. This is just what I do. Also, I do hope that if you don't know the definition of any of the words in these books, or any book, that you take the time to look them up. Save it, record it, memorize it, because the information will make complete sense. Without knowing the definition of a word, even with surrounding word assumption, you will not get it in its entirety. Misunderstanding important points that will make assimilating impossible within the context in which it's given. Alright, so also make sure you put your book title in your journal, your page, if it's a video, the video number, the name, etc., the time even of the point that you want to remember. If it's a physical book, an asterisk or a symbol next to the point phrase you want to remember. So from your journal, you can now go straight to it as wanted. Highlighting or outlining in book is also so helpful. I also check the index in a book to make sure the topic is easily found, because sometimes it's not in the index, so I create my own index for important books without an index, or if it has one, I add to the existing one. So that's what I wanted to say. And also, so yeah, you definitely want to listen to this whole book again at some point in your lives. It would be better after the appendix is done. And as soon as they are done, I'm going to literally put them in. I recorded this book so that in the notes, I have great notes, so that I know where to insert my appendix after it's recorded into the video, which video it goes into, and all of that. But yeah, you gotta read it at least 3 times, or listen to it at least 3 times.